Hello, welcome to the Southern Bible Thumper channel. For this upload, we will be reading 1 Samuel chapter 19. And Saul spake to Jonathan his son and to all his servants that they should kill David. But Jonathan, Saul's son, delighted much in David, and Jonathan told David, saying, Saul my father seeketh to kill thee. Now therefore, I pray thee, take heed to thyself unto the morning, and abide in a secret place, and hide thyself, and I will go out and stand beside my father in the field where thou art, and I will commune with my father of thee, and what I see that I will tell thee. And Jonathan spake good of David unto Saul his father, and said unto him, Let not the king sin against his servant, against David, because he hath not sinned against thee, and because his works have been to thee word very good. For he did put his life in his hand, and slew the Philistine. And the Lord wrought a great salvation for all Israel. Thou sawest it, and didst rejoice. Wherefore, then wilt thou sin against innocent blood, to slay David without a cause? And Saul hearkened unto the voice of Jonathan, and Saul sware, As the Lord liveth, he shall not be slain. And Jonathan called David, and Jonathan shewed him all those things. And Jonathan brought David to Saul, and he was in his presence, as in times past. And there was war again, and David went out and fought with the Philistines, and slew them with a great slaughter, and they fled from him. And the evil spirit from the Lord was upon Saul, as he sat in his house with his javelin in his hand, and David played with his hand. And Saul sought to smite David even to the wall with a javelin, but he slipped out of Saul's presence, and he smote the javelin into the wall, and David fled and escaped that night. Saul also sent messengers unto David's house to watch him and to slay him in the morning. And Michal, David's wife, told him, saying, If thou save not thy life tonight, tomorrow thou shalt be slain. So Michal let David down through a window, and he went and fled and escaped. And Michal took an image and laid it in the bed, and put a pillow of goat's hair for his bolster, and covered it with a cloth. When Saul sent messengers to take David, she said, He is sick. And Saul sent the messengers again to see David, saying, Bring him up to me in the bed, that I may slay him. And when the messengers were come in, behold, there was an image in the bed, with a pillow of goat's hair for his bolster. And Saul said unto Michal, Why hast thou deceived me so, and sent away mine enemy, that he is escaped? And Michal answered Saul, He said unto me, Let me go, why should I kill thee? So David fled and escaped, and came to Samuel to Ramah, and told him all that Saul had done to him. And he and Samuel went and dwelt in Naioth. And it was told Saul, saying, Behold, David is at Naioth in Ramah. And Saul sent messengers to take David. And when they saw the company of the prophets prophesying, and Samuel standing as appointed over them, the Spirit of God was upon the messengers of Saul, and they also prophesied. And when it was told Saul, he sent other messengers, and they prophesied likewise. And Saul sent messengers again the third time, and they prophesied also. Then went he also to Ramah, and came to a great well that is in Sechu, and he asked and said, Where are Samuel and David? And one said, Behold, they be at Naioth in Ramah. And he went thither to Naioth in Ramah, and the Spirit of God was upon him also. And he went on and prophesied until he came to Naioth in Ramah. And he stripped off his clothes also, and prophesied before Samuel in like manner, and lay down naked all that day and all that night. Wherefore they say, Is Saul also among the prophets? So we are going to be reviewing 1 Samuel 19. We're going to be discussing King Saul in some form until his death in 1 Samuel 31. He is the second king of Israel, and Samuel is the current judge. So after Moses and Joshua, they are Israel's first leaders. They don't have a status or a title. Once they die, Israel wants another form of leadership in the form of another human. So God appointed judges in Judges chapter 2, verse 18. 1 Samuel chapter 8, Israel demands a king. The first king of Israel was Gideon's evil son Abimelech in Judges chapter 9. In 1 Samuel chapter 9, God tells Samuel, who is Israel's current prophet and judge, that Saul is Israel's next king. So in 1 Samuel chapter 8, when Israel tells Samuel that they want a king. God wants Samuel to help Israel get the type of leadership that they want. So he reveals to Samuel that the next king is going to be Saul, and he wants in chapter 10 Samuel to anoint Saul. So Samuel anoints Saul, and then in a public ceremony announces Saul as Israel's next king. Chapter 11. Saul leads Israel to a successful victory against the Ammonites, and the Ammonites are the inbred descendants of Lot and his daughter in Genesis chapter 19. 1 Samuel 12. Samuel, Israel's last judge and prophet, he holds a public ceremony, and the purpose is for Israel to address their concerns or grievances with his leadership. In 1 Samuel chapter 8, they demand a king, and they did have a legitimate grievance. Samuel's sons were in a position of leadership, and they were wayward. Israel was unsatisfied with them. But when we look at verses 5 and 20, they specifically wanted a king more so that they can be like the nations around them instead of just wanting different leadership because they were tired of the wayward leaders that they had. So Samuel gives Israel the chance to confront him and tell him what was wrong with his leadership. Israel decides that he's been a good leader. 1 Samuel 13, Jonathan, who was Saul's son, attacks a Philistine military structure. Israel hides in fear, and there are some translations that say some of the Israelites hid in graveyards, trying to escape the wrath of the Philistines. King Saul, realizing that he's lost the confidence of the people, he makes an unauthorized sacrifice out of fear. God regrets making King Saul the leader of Israel. 1 Samuel 14. Jonathan and his assistant attack the Philistines again. They are so successful that the Israelites who hid in the previous chapter realign with Saul's army. Hebrews, who had joined the Philistine army, are also inspired to join under Saul's leadership. 1 Samuel 15, God instructs Saul to destroy the Amalekites, who include men, women, children, and animals. The Amalekites are Esau's descendants with a Hittite Canaanite woman, and we see that listed in Genesis chapter 36. So, to answer the question why God might have commanded the total destruction of animals and children, the first reason God is law. Explanation is never required when God makes a command. Even though explanation is not required because God is the creator of all, and if he makes a command, he is the law, he is above the law. So that's the only reason that we need. But there is explanation available. In Deuteronomy chapter 7, Moses lists that the Hittites are among those tribes that Israel is to destroy. But again, Moses talks the entire book of Deuteronomy, and I just wanted to put this scripture up just to mention the last time this group of people are mentioned. So Deuteronomy is the first chapter that I found. But Moses talks the entire book of Deuteronomy. He contradicts himself a few times. So another reference that is a direct command from God is necessary. The purpose of this account is to separate God's commands from additional information that's in the Bible. The additional information that is not a direct command from God, we need to ask God how that information should be applied to our lives, how we should interpret it. But the first step is making the distinction. Is this a command of God, or is this just someone talking for an entire chapter? The book of Deuteronomy, until you get to the end, I think it's chapter 31, where God tells Moses that, the children of Israel are going to disobey again. I'd have to read it again, but it isn't until the very end that God starts to talk. And Moses contradicts himself a few times in the book of Deuteronomy. Okay, whatever. We get to Exodus 23. God begins speaking to Israel in Exodus 20, and that's when you see the 10 Commandments. God continues to speak until Exodus 23. I think he speaks some more, but in Exodus 23, God commands Israel to drive out the Hittites, specifically by name. And they're supposed to do this once they settle into the promised land. By Judges chapter 1, Israel has settled into the promised land. but they didn't drive out the inhabitants. So in Judges chapter 2, an angel confronts Israel, reminding them that they didn't follow God's command. Leviticus 18, God commands Israel not to behave like the Egyptians or the Canaanites, which they disobey in 1 Samuel chapter 8 by requesting a king to be like the other nations in verses 5 and 20. So again, in 1 Samuel chapter 8, their leaders were wayward, but that wasn't the reason why they wanted a change in leadership. They wanted to be like the nations around them, and that was a problem. So the Hittites are Canaanites. How we prove them? Or how do we prove by looking at the Bible that this is one of the groups of people God wanted driven out? Because again, the Amalekites that God told Israel to completely destroy in 1 Samuel 15, they are the descendants of Esau and the Hittites. So the Amalekites are the generation that came, or the group of people that came from the Hittites. So we have to now prove how the Hittites are Canaanites, or how the Hittites are people that Israel needs to drive out. Genesis 15:20, God tells Abraham, or Abram, that was before his name change, that he, God, will give the land of the Hittites to Abraham's descendants. So the Hittites are listed as living on Canaanite territory. How do we prove the Israelites are the descendants of Abram? Genesis 25, Abraham fathered Isaac, who fathered Esau and Jacob. Genesis 32, Jacob is renamed Israel. So then there's a portion where he's being referred to as Jacob and Israel. Genesis 49, the Bible names Jacob or Israel's 12 sons as the tribes of Israel. And it says that phrase directly, the 12 tribes of Israel. Exodus chapter 1, the Bible refers to Jacob or Israel's lineage as the sons, the descendants, the children, the people of Israel, or just the term Israelites. And it depends on what translation you're reading. So we have proved that Israel comes from Abraham. We have proved that the Hittites occupy land among the groups of people that Israel is supposed to inherit, and that the Amalekites are Hittites. We are currently discussing why in 1 Samuel 15, God wants the entire Amalekite population destroyed, including women, children, and animals. We have reviewed Deuteronomy chapter 7, Exodus chapter 23, and Leviticus 18, which supports why God might have commanded this total destruction of a group of people, animals, and children. Reviewing Leviticus 18 again, God commands Israel not to behave like the Egyptians or Canaanites, but also in verses 24 through 30, God explains how the people living on this land, including the Amalekites, were making the earth sick because of their sexual practices. And the earth was so sick that in Leviticus 19, God commands Israel, once they get into this new land, that you can't even eat any of the crops for 5 years because the land is so sick. So we explained Israel's request for a new king in 1 Samuel 8. Saul is revealed as the new king in chapter 9. Saul is anointed privately and announced publicly in chapter 10. Saul leads Israel to victory in chapter 11. Samuel allows Israel to discuss issues with his leadership in chapter 12. Jonathan attacks the Philistine structure for the first time in chapter 13. He attacks again in chapter 14. And in chapter 15, God instructs Israel to destroy the Amalekites completely. God chooses David to be Israel's new king. He is anointed by Samuel, then hired to play the harp for King Saul in 1 Samuel 16. And then we know about 1 Samuel 17 that David was victorious in killing Goliath. 1 Samuel 18, King Saul grows jealous of David. He tries to kill David twice in this chapter. David is still King Saul's employee. Let's examine King Saul momentarily. In chapter 10, Saul hides when it's time for him to be publicly announced as Israel's new king. He has to be retrieved and forced to participate. 1 Samuel 13, King Saul makes an unauthorized burnt sacrifice out of fear. Chapter 14, when his son attacks the Philistine military structure for the second time, there's a period where it's unclear if he's winning. So while it's unclear, King Saul demands that the Ark of the Covenant be brought to the Israelite battleground, sort of like a token of good luck to help the Israelites uh, win. And the Israelites already tried this against the Philistines, the exact same people, the exact same scenario. In 1 Samuel chapter 4, the Israelites were not victorious. Again, fighting against the Philistines. Once he saw that Jonathan was going to be successful in chapter 14, he said, you know what, don't bring the ark out, just leave it. So, chapter 15, King Saul admits that he did not follow God's command out of fear, because again, he was supposed to completely destroy the animals, the people, the men, the women, children. He didn't do it. So, when Samuel confronts him, he explains he was fearful. So now, 1 Samuel chapter 18, King Saul is now jealous of David because in chapter 17, David slew Goliath with no weapons, just a slingshot and one rock. The next chapter, the women of Israel were praising King Saul and David, and they said, well, Saul has slain thousands, but David has slain tens of thousands. And immediately that provoked Saul's jealousy because he already knows he's not built like David. He's fearful. So 1 Samuel chapter 19, Saul tells his staff that he wants David killed. Jonathan, Saul's son, is David's friend, so he warns David to hide. Jonathan advocates on behalf of David, reminding King Saul that David is innocent. Saul agrees not to harm David. David fights the Philistines on Saul's behalf and defeats them in verse 5. Saul is vexed with the evil spirit again. David plays the harp for him again. Saul tries to kill David again, unprovoked. This is the third time that Saul tries to kill David. David flees and Saul sends men to David's home. David's wife, or Saul's daughter, helps David escape to safety. David finds Samuel and tells him what's going on. They flee to another city where prophets were prophesying. King Saul sent 3 groups of men to retrieve David. That was unsuccessful. Saul came himself to confront David, but is overtaken by the Spirit of God. King Saul, in an attempt to retrieve David, gets overtaken by the Spirit. He removes all of his clothes, and he lays completely naked on the ground for hours. Summarizing 1 Samuel 19, in verses 1 through 3, Saul tells his servants and his son, Jonathan, that they need to kill David. Jonathan is David's friend, so he warns David to hide. Jonathan says he's going to give him any information that he can. In verse 4, Jonathan reminds Saul that David did not sin against him, and also that he risked his life to fight Goliath. So in verses 6 through 8, Saul says, you know what? I'll stop trying to kill David then. You're right. So Jonathan tells David, you have nothing to worry about. He's agreed to not want to kill you anymore. So the Philistines begin to war with Israel again, and David led them to victory. Then we get to verses 9 through 12. The evil spirit came upon Saul again after David risked his life to lead Israel to success against the Philistines. King Saul begins to get one of these fits again. David plays his harp for him while King Saul, who has already tried to kill David twice, holds a javelin in his hand. King Saul tries to kill David for a third time, and David gets away. I'm telling you, toxic work environment. King Saul is his boss, and he's so jealous and insecure around David, who is his employee. In verse 13, David's wife, Michal, who is King Saul's daughter, she takes an image, and the image is Uh, it seemed like a statue. It says idol, image. But she took some sort of object, put it in the bed, and put, hair over it to make it look like David was in the bed. King Saul sends men to kill David. His wife Michal tells the people that David's sick in the bed. Saul demands that David be brought to him. So then the men discover that David is not in the bed, but it's just an object and some hair. So in verse 18, David found Samuel in Ramah. Samuel is the prophet, the last judge. David told Samuel what happened. They both fled and went to a different city, Naioth. Verse 19, King Saul finds out. Verse 20, Samuel and other prophets were prophesying. So I'm not quite sure. Prophesizing. I would like to look that word up really quickly. To utter as if by divine inspiration, divinely inspired speech to make a prediction. Okay. Saul's messengers that were sent to get David, they began to prophesy too, or speak under this divine inspiration. Saul tries sending messengers 2 extra times, and they each were overtaken by the Spirit of God. Then verses 22 through 24, King Saul is so demanding that he decides he's going to go down there and get David himself. And instead, he gets overtaken by the Spirit and he gets completely naked and lays out on the ground for hours. That was 1 Samuel chapter 19. Thank you for clicking on the video. I love you. Have a wonderful day.